see the shroud in negative, like Jamie, pull up an image of it. It's very strange. Like it shows the lash marks on his body.
Yeah.
It shows his facial features. It shows the holes where his wrist is, where he was crucified.
I realized that my Christian brothers and sisters were not getting the truth about the Shroud of Turin.
3 geneticists looked at the DNA results from the Shroud of Turin and refused to sign the report. The genetic profile didn't match any known population on Earth, and the lead researcher called it biologically impossible under any conventional framework. Barrie Schwortz spent 40 years trying to prove this cloth was a fake. What the DNA revealed instead changes everything. The skeptic. But the DNA is only the final chapter of a 40-year nightmare. It starts the night Schwartz puts this cloth under a camera and watches his entire worldview collapse. In 1978, Barrie Schwortz is one of NASA's most trusted technical photographers. The kind of expert agencies call when imaging precision means the difference between a billion-dollar success and a catastrophic failure. His work involves satellite imagery, classified defense projects, and scientific documentation so sensitive that clearance levels are measured in acronyms most civilians never hear. So, when a team of elite American scientists requests his expertise for a classified examination of the Shroud of Turin, he almost laughs in their faces. He's Jewish, he's a scientist, and he's absolutely certain this thing is a medieval painting, a clever forgery some talented artist cooked up centuries ago. Case closed before it starts. Then he lands in Turin and puts the cloth under his camera. There was something unique about the image on the shroud, something that was not typical of any other images that any of us were familiar with. The shroud looks like a faint, ghostly impression to the naked eye, barely visible, almost like a shadow someone left behind on linen. Most people who see it in person for the first time are underwhelmed. It doesn't look like much of anything, but when Schwartz photographs it and examines the negative, the image explodes into detail.
Something unique about the image on the shroud, something that was not typical of any other images that any of us were familiar with.
Lash marks running across the back in parallel lines, each one consistent with a Roman flagrum, a whip designed to tear flesh from bone. Precise facial features emerging with a clarity that makes his throat tighten. Wounds in the wrists, not the palms where medieval artists always placed them, but the wrists, exactly where Roman crucifixion nails pierce the carpal bones to support body weight. Swelling around the cheekbones consistent with a severe beating. Blood flow patterns that follow the exact trajectories gravity dictates for a body suspended vertically. It's as if someone captured a three-dimensional body onto a flat surface using a process that doesn't exist. He searches for brushstrokes. Nothing. He scans for pigment residue under magnification. Nothing. He hunts for any trace of any known artistic technique from any century in recorded history. Absolutely nothing. The team works 5 grueling days and nights in a climate-controlled room, barely sleeping, running experiment after exhausting experiment. Schwartz photographs every microscopic fiber, every mysterious marking, every impossible detail, embedded in the fabric with equipment designed for NASA satellite analysis. And slowly, the color drains from his face, because this image isn't painted, it isn't burned, it isn't scorched, it isn't photographed. According to every instrument in their arsenal, it shouldn't exist at all. Yet, there it is, a full-body image of a crucified man, front and back, with anatomical precision that makes forensic pathologists go silent. During the investigation, one of his colleagues, Don Lin, a top imaging specialist from NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, who worked on the Voyager and Galileo missions, tells Schwartz something he never forgets. Jesus was Jewish too. Maybe God wanted one of his chosen people on this team. Schwartz tries to walk away from the project, twice. He tells himself, this isn't his problem, this isn't his faith, this has nothing to do with him. The shroud won't let him go. The impossible image. Over the next 3 years, the team throws everything at the cloth. Every test NASA has in its toolkit. Every technique modern forensics can offer. X-ray, ultraviolet, infrared, mass spectrometry, microscopic fiber analysis at magnifications that detect a single molecule of paint. They bring in specialists from a dozen different scientific disciplines. They run the same tests multiple times, just to make sure their equipment isn't malfunctioning. No paint, no dye, no scorch marks, No photographic chemicals, no ink, no charcoal, no tempera, no oil, nothing. And they don't merely fail to identify how the image got there. They prove, through rigorously peer-reviewed research published in major scientific journals, that no known technology from any era in human history can produce this image with these specific characteristics. The image exists only on the topmost fibers of the cloth, penetrating to a depth of 1 or 2 fibers. No liquid, no energy source, no artistic method behaves that way. The coloration comes from a chemical change in the linen itself. The fibers are dehydrated and oxidized in a pattern so precise that it encodes 3-dimensional distance information between the cloth and the body it covered. No painting technique ever developed does that. No photograph does that. No computer simulation can reverse engineer how it happened. Nothing in the entire history of human technology produces this result. At the end of our 3 years, we published our work in peer-reviewed scientific journals. And the broader scientific establishment goes quiet, disturbingly quiet.
At the end of our 3 years, we published our work in peer-reviewed scientific journals.
No major rebuttals in any journal. No serious academic challenges to the methodology, the data, or the conclusions. No competing papers offering alternative explanations. No one steps forward to disprove the findings, or even attempt to replicate the tests and reach a different result. Just silence across every major university and research institution on the planet. The kind of silence that settles over a room when everyone knows the answer, but nobody wants to say it out loud. The kind of silence that tells you more than any published paper ever could. I realized that my Christian brothers and sisters were not getting the truth about the Shroud of Turin. Think about this. We put robots on the surface of Mars. We sequenced the entire human genome down to the last base pair. We split individual atoms and harness the energy inside them, but we cannot replicate the image on the Shroud of Turin using any technology available today. Not with lasers, not with radiation, not with any photographic process, not with any computer-assisted method. Nothing produces an image with these exact characteristics. Nothing even comes close. The blood that wouldn't turn brown. Even after witnessing all of this firsthand, the impossible image, the failed tests, the deafening silence from the scientific community, Schwortz still refuses to believe the Shroud is authentic. For 18 years, he rejects what his own research tells him. 18 years of knowing the image can't be explained, and still insisting there has to be a rational explanation he's missing. The reason he clings to, blood evidence. The blood stains on the Shroud are still red. Bright, distinctly, unmistakably red. And everyone with basic forensic training knows that old dried blood turns dark brown within hours of exposure to air. This is elementary biology. Blood oxidizes. It darkens, always, without exception. This single detail keeps Schwortz locked in his skepticism for almost 2 decades. Every time someone brings up the Shroud's authenticity, he points to the red blood and shuts the conversation down. Then, in 1995, his phone rings, and the voice on the other end dismantles his entire position in under 5 minutes. In 1995, after years of resistance on my part, world-renowned blood expert Dr. Alan Adler was on the phone with me, and he answered the final question that had kept me from accepting the Shroud as authentic. Dr. Alan Adler, a biochemist and one of the world's foremost authorities on blood chemistry, a fellow Jewish researcher whose work governments and major forensic institutions rely on, delivers the answer Schwortz never saw coming.
But in 1995, after years of actually resistance on my part, world-renowned blood expert Dr. Alan Adler was on the phone with me, and he answered the final question that had kept me from accepting the Shroud as authentic.
Barrie, the blood samples on the Shroud contain abnormally high bilirubin levels. Extremely high. Schwortz pauses. What does that mean, Alan? When a human body undergoes extreme prolonged physical trauma, savage beating, brutal whipping, piercing with thorns, crucifixion, the biological system floods with bilirubin as an acute shock response. The liver can't process it fast enough. The compound saturates the blood at levels far beyond anything normal. And blood with those elevated bilirubin levels stays red, permanently. Not after a year, not after a century, not after 2,000 years. The trauma itself locks the chemistry in place forever. Schwartz's hands go cold. His mind races backward through 18 years of research, 18 years of stubborn denial. The evidence sat directly in front of him the entire time. The one detail he thought disproved authenticity, the single data point he built his entire skeptical position on, is actually the strongest proof of it. The blood stays red, precisely because the person who bled on that cloth suffered exactly the catastrophic physical trauma described in the crucifixion accounts. The blood is red because the torture was real. Every lingering doubt dissolves in a single moment. The shroud isn't just old, it's exactly what it always claimed to be. If this evidence is already making you rethink everything you thought you knew, hit subscribe right now, because what the DNA actually reveals is even more disturbing. The DNA that shouldn't exist. When researchers finally extract viable DNA from the shroud's ancient fibers, they expect routine contamination. Medieval monks who venerated it for centuries. Renaissance restorers who stitch patches onto its damaged edges. Italian conservators who handled it with bare hands long before modern preservation protocols existed. Bishops, priests, scientists, photographers, hundreds of people touched this cloth over 2,000 years. The expectation is straightforward. Standard European DNA scattered randomly across the fabric. A messy genetic fingerprint of everyone who ever came in contact with it. A contamination profile so predictable, it's barely worth studying. That's not what the sequencing shows. Not even close. The genetic markers come from multiple geographic regions that have no business appearing together on a single piece of cloth from 1st century Jerusalem. Middle Eastern traces? Expected. But the dominant signatures don't stop there. South Asian sequences that trace back to populations in the Indian subcontinent. North African markers linked to ancient communities along the Nile and across the Saharan trade corridors. Genetic material from populations along specific historical trade and migration routes that predate the medieval period by centuries. Routes that most modern historians barely acknowledge existed. And the distribution pattern destroys the contamination theory entirely. Random handling over 2,000 years produces a scattered, chaotic genetic profile. A little Italian DNA here, some French there, traces of whoever touched it last week. That's what contamination looks like. It's messy, it's random. It follows no organizing principle because there is no organizing principle. Just centuries of human contact, leaving random genetic fingerprints. The shroud's DNA shows the exact opposite. The sequences cluster in geographically specific concentrations across the fabric. They map to ancient populations with mathematical precision. They follow patterns that no model of accidental contamination, no model of any kind, can produce. The Middle Eastern markers concentrate near the facial area and the wound sites. The South Asian sequences appear along the edges of the cloth. The North African material follows a distribution that suggests direct contact, not airborne contamination or incidental handling over centuries. Someone, or something, left these genetic signatures in a pattern so specific that 2,000 years of subsequent handling failed to erase it. 3 geneticists look at the results and refuse to sign the official report. Not because the data is unclear, the sequencing is clean, the methodology is sound, the lab work is impeccable. They refuse because signing means attaching their professional names and institutional reputations to findings that their universities cannot explain and their careers cannot survive. A 4th researcher describes the profile as biologically impossible under any conventional framework. A 5th admits in private conversation that she has never encountered anything like this in her entire career. And she has analyzed DNA from Egyptian mummies, Neolithic remains, and bronze. Age burial sites across 3 continents. She tells colleagues the shroud's genetic profile doesn't belong in any database she has access to. It doesn't belong in any database anyone has access to. The genetic material doesn't just defy expectations. It defies classification entirely. Some sequences appear corrupted or incomplete in ways that don't match normal biological degradation. Ancient DNA breaks down in predictable patterns. Researchers know exactly what 500 years of molecular decay looks like, what 1,000 years looks like, what 2,000 years looks like. The degradation follows mathematical curves as reliable as radiocarbon dating. The shroud's DNA doesn't follow those curves. It breaks rules that every geneticist alive considers fundamental to the science itself. The degradation pattern suggests something far older than 2,000 years, or something that experienced conditions no burial cloth on Earth should ever encounter. And that's the part that terrifies the researchers who have seen the full data set. Not the anomalous geographic markers, not the impossible distribution patterns, the degradation signature. Because if the DNA degradation doesn't match any known timeline of biological decay, then the question becomes inescapable. What happened to this cloth that altered the genetic material at a molecular level? What kind of event leaves DNA in a state that doesn't correspond to any natural process science has ever documented? The question nobody in the scientific establishment wants to ask out loud. What happens if this DNA is not just ancient, but impossibly ancient? What happens if these genetic markers point to something that predates every known human population in the databases? What happens if the most sophisticated genetic analysis tools on the planet, tools that successfully identify remains tens of thousands of years old, produce results that don't fit any existing model of human biology? That's the question that keeps researchers awake at 3 in the morning, staring at the ceiling, running the numbers again in their heads. Not because they can't answer it, but because every possible answer terrifies them. The official position holds that the Shroud is a medieval forgery, a position that now requires simultaneously ignoring blood chemistry that proves extreme physical trauma, image formation that defies every technology ever invented, and DNA that doesn't match any known human population on Earth. The predetermined conclusion came first. The evidence was supposed to obediently follow along and confirm the narrative, but the evidence refuses to cooperate, and it gets more damning, more inexplicable, and more terrifying with every new test that researchers dare to run. Scientists who built their entire reputations on dismissing this cloth now avoid the topic entirely, not because they have answers, because the questions have become too dangerous to engage with publicly. But the DNA isn't even the most unsettling part of this story. The most unsettling part is what the cloth's very existence tells us about the people who were there at the beginning. Whoever pulled that burial cloth from the tomb and preserved it did so at the risk of their own execution. Roman soldiers didn't ask questions. They didn't hold trials for grave robbers or relic thieves. They killed you on the spot and moved on to the next problem. The penalty for disturbing a burial site in Roman-occupied Jerusalem was death. Swift, brutal, and public. So ask yourself honestly, would you risk that for a piece of fabric from your neighbor down the street? Would you sneak past armed guards, enter a sealed tomb, and remove a blood-stained burial cloth, knowing that getting caught means you die the same way the man wrapped in it died? Or would you only take that risk, that suicidal, irrational, impossible risk, for someone you genuinely believed had just conquered death itself? The very existence of this cloth tells us something that the history books refuse to admit. Someone thought this piece of linen was worth dying for, and 2,000 years later, the science is starting to explain why they were right. Schwortz spent the rest of his career making sure the evidence survived, launching Shroud.com, the world's largest scientific database on the Shroud, with no sponsors, no institutional funding, no outside influence. Just raw data for anyone willing to look. But the investigation didn't just change his understanding of the cloth, it changed him. At 50 years old, raised in a strict Orthodox Jewish household, having spent decades rejecting faith as irrelevant superstition, Schwortz confronted the one question he'd been running from his entire life. I was genuinely shocked to discover that God had actually been there the entire time. He was simply waiting patiently for me to turn around and acknowledge him. Barrie Schwortz never set out to prove anything about faith. He followed the evidence, reluctantly, stubbornly, fighting it every single step of the way for 4 decades. And that evidence led him somewhere that modern science still cannot explain. The blood chemistry confirms catastrophic physical torture consistent with Roman crucifixion. The image formation defies every known technology humanity has ever developed. And the DNA changes everything we thought we knew. So, answer this honestly. Is the Shroud of Turin authentic physical evidence of what happened in that tomb 2,000 years ago? Or is it the most sophisticated forgery in human history, created using advanced techniques that the entire modern scientific establishment with all its billion-dollar laboratories, its supercomputers, its genetic sequencing technology, still cannot identify, explain, or replicate. Either way, the implications are massive, and either way, you deserve to know what the evidence actually says, not what institutions have decided you're allowed to hear. Drop your answer in the comments. I want to know what you believe after hearing this evidence. And if you want more buried evidence and suppressed history that mainstream channels won't touch, subscribe, and turn on notifications right now.